Tom stared at the holographic display floating above his desk, his four eyes blinking in sequence as he processed the data streaming across the screen. After 15 years of studying various species across the galaxy, he had never seen anything quite like this. The readings had to be wrong. He pressed his hand against the scanner to verify his access level and ran the analysis program again. The results came back identical to the previous 17 attempts. According to these scans, the creatures on the third planet of this unremarkable yellow star were breaking at least 36 known laws of biological efficiency. A soft chime announced the arrival of senior researcher Mark. Tom quickly straightened his posture plates, causing his normally slouched form to extend to its full height. Mark's silvery skin reflected the blue light of the laboratory as he glided into the room. "I assume you've reviewed the preliminary data." Mark's voice resonated at the perfect frequency. Like all members of their species, he had complete control over his biological functions. "Yes, senior researcher," Tom replied, trying to match Mark's perfect tone, but falling slightly flat. "I believe our instruments may need recalibration. These readings suggest that these humans are surviving despite massive biological flaws." Mark made a gesture of mild amusement, his skin rippling in precise patterns. "The instruments are functioning correctly. That's why the Research Council has assigned you to head this investigation. Your history of thinking outside standard parameters makes you suitable for this unusual case." Tom wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a criticism. In their society, thinking outside standard parameters was usually considered a flaw, much like the countless flaws their scans had detected in human biology. "Look at this," Tom said, expanding one of the holographic charts. "Their internal temperature regulation is chaos. They waste enormous energy maintaining a narrow temperature range, using a primitive evaporation system that leaves them constantly depleted of minerals. It's absurdly inefficient compared to our thermal scales." "Indeed," Mark agreed. "And yet they survive. Not only survive, but they've developed spacefaring technology despite these limitations. The Council needs to know how. And more importantly, they need to know if these biological aberrations pose any threat to galactic stability." Tom cycled through more data streams. "Their skeletal structure is rigid and frequently breaks. Their muscles tear and must constantly rebuild. Their reproductive system is permanently active rather than phase-controlled. Their waste elimination processes are—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic term. "Continuous rather than scheduled. How did they even evolve past the primitive stage?" Mark's skin shifted to a deeper shade, indicating serious concern. "That's exactly what you need to find out. You have full access to the observation data. Study their biology, their behavior, their environments. Find out what's wrong with them, or what's right with them that we're not seeing." "What do you mean, what's right with them?" Tom asked, his confusion causing his skin to ripple irregularly. "Consider this, junior researcher," Mark said, his tone shifting to teaching frequency. "Our species achieved biological perfection through careful evolution. We eliminated inefficiencies. We optimized our systems. We achieved perfect homeostasis. And yet," he gestured to the holographic display of Earth, "these humans with their flawed biology have achieved comparable technological advancement in less time than it took us." Tom felt his skin temperature fluctuate slightly. A sign of excitement he quickly regulated. "You think their flaws might actually be advantages?" "I think," Mark said carefully, "that the Council is concerned. Either we're missing something important about their biology, or they represent a form of life that succeeds despite violating everything we know about biological efficiency. Either answer has profound implications." As Mark glided out of the laboratory, Tom turned back to the data streams. He had one standard solar cycle to provide answers to the Council. He began organizing the observation feeds, starting with basic biological functions. The humans would be waking up soon in their various time zones, their bizarre sleep pattern being yet another biological mystery he needed to unravel. What he didn't know yet was that every answer he found would only lead to more questions, and that his investigation would challenge not just his understanding of biology, but of perfection itself. Tom watched the live feeds from Earth with growing confusion. In the span of one rotation, he had observed humans moving from freezing environments to hot ones with barely any adjustment period. A human would step out of an ice-covered building, walk through bitter cold, then enter a heated room, all while their bodies maintained function. It made no sense. He pulled up his own species' thermal requirements on a separate screen. Like all advanced life forms, they maintained their temperature within a precise 2-degree range. Anything more extreme required protective equipment or complete shutdown of non-essential systems. It was efficient, logical, and perfect. But humans, they were walking biological furnaces. Computer, show me the thermal imaging from location 647B. Tom commanded. The screen filled with heat signatures from a human athletic event called a marathon. The readings were alarming. The humans were deliberately running until their core temperatures rose significantly, cooling themselves through what his instruments identified as sweating. They're purposely leaking water and minerals to cool down, he muttered to himself. And somehow this works. A notification popped up on his screen. One of his monitoring drones had captured footage of humans in an even more baffling activity. They were voluntarily entering a small wooden room and increasing the temperature to levels that should have caused immediate tissue damage. According to the data, they called this a sauna. Just as Tom was about to file an urgent report about possible mass human suicide, the readings showed the humans calmly walking out, their bodies already adjusting back to normal. Some even proceeded to jump into cold water, their temperature swinging wildly in the opposite direction. He was so absorbed in the readings that he didn't notice Mark entering the lab until the senior researcher spoke. Finding anything interesting? Tom's skin flickered with excitement before he could control it. Senior researcher, their temperature regulation defies everything we know about biological systems. Look at this data. They function in environments that range from 248 to 310 units on the standard scale. That's a range of 62 units. Mark glided closer to examine the readings. And they survived these variations. More than survive, Tom said, his professional tone slipping as his enthusiasm grew. They seemed to enjoy them. They deliberately exposed themselves to temperature extremes for something they call pleasure or sports. Their bodies just adapt. Impossible, Mark said, but his skin color showed uncertainty. No species can maintain cellular cohesion across such a range. The energy cost alone would. That's just it, Tom interrupted, then quickly adjusted his tone. My apologies, senior researcher, but look at these efficiency calculations. They don't try to maintain a perfect temperature like we do. Instead, their bodies constantly adjust. They generate heat when cold, release it when hot. Their skin changes, their blood flow shifts, their metabolism adjusts, all automatically. Mark studied the data in silence for several moments. And this system works better than our perfect homeostasis. Not better, Tom said carefully. Different. We achieve perfect stability through precise control. They achieve survival through constant adaptation. In stable conditions, our system is more efficient. But in changing conditions, he let the implication hang in the air. The Council won't like this, Mark said quietly. Our entire understanding of biological advancement is based on the pursuit of perfection through stability. If these humans are advancing despite, or because of, their imperfect systems. A new alert flashed on Tom's screen. One of his monitoring stations was tracking humans in what they called a polar plunge, voluntarily swimming in nearly frozen water. Next to it, another feed showed humans in a desert region continuing their daily activities in temperatures that would melt his own thermal regulation scales. I need to expand the study, Tom said, his skin rippling with barely contained excitement. There's something we're missing. These temperature variations, they're not just random flaws. There's a pattern here, a different kind of perfection. Mark's skin shifted to the formal pattern of official warning. Be careful with such thoughts, junior researcher. Finding patterns in chaos can be a sign of contaminated objectivity. But as Mark left the lab, Tom noticed his superior's skin showed traces of the pattern for deep thought. Perhaps he wasn't the only one beginning to question what they really knew about biological perfection. The medical alert from Earth observation post 34 woke Tom from his rest cycle. He quickly activated his screens, expecting to log another case of human biological failure. What he saw instead made him question everything he knew about tissue damage and repair. A human had broken their leg while doing something called skateboarding. According to all known biological laws, this should have meant a permanent loss of function, at least until the limb could be replaced with a synthetic part. But the humans had simply wrapped the broken bone in a hard shell they called a cast and waited. Tom spent the next few days watching the healing process through his instruments. The broken bone wasn't staying broken. It was growing back together. He was deep in his analysis when a soft warning tone told him someone was entering his lab. He quickly tried to hide his excitement as Mark approached his workstation. "You've been studying their injury responses for 15 cycles now," Mark said. "The council expects a report soon." "Look at this," Tom said, unable to contain himself. He pulled up a series of scans showing the broken bone's healing progress. They don't replace damaged parts. They rebuild them from the inside. Mark's skin showed the pattern for skepticism. All species have basic repair functions. "Not like this," Tom insisted. He pulled up more files. "Cuts seal themselves. Muscles tear and grow back stronger. Even their bones aren't truly solid. They're constantly breaking down and rebuilding. Everything in their bodies is always changing." "That sounds incredibly wasteful," Mark said, but he moved closer to study the images. "I thought so too," at first, Tom admitted. "But watch this." He played a recording of a human athlete training. "When they put stress on their muscles, the tissue breaks down. Our sensors show micro tears forming. By our standards, this is major tissue damage. But the humans do this on purpose." "On purpose?" Mark's skin rippled with disbelief. "Why would they deliberately damage themselves?" "Because they grow back stronger," Tom said, his voice rising with excitement. "Their bodies don't just repair the damage. They improve the tissue. They add more muscle fibers. They increase bone density. They grow new blood vessels. Every injury, every stress, makes them more resilient." Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying the data. "This goes against everything we know about efficient biological design. Our replacement systems are perfect. Damaged parts are removed and replaced with identical new ones. No waste, no variance, no uncertainty." "But no improvement," Tom said softly. He immediately regretted his boldness, but Mark seemed too fascinated by the data to notice the implied criticism. A new alert flashed on Tom's screen. One of his observation drones had recorded a human child falling and scraping their knee. He expanded the image, letting Mark watch as the wound went through its healing stages. "See how the damage triggers an immediate response. Their blood carries repair cells to the site. New tissue grows. Even their nervous system adapts. The same injury will hurt less if it happens again. They're learning from the damage." "Learning from damage," Mark repeated. His skin showed a complex pattern Tom had never seen before. "The council needs to see this, but be careful how you present it," suggesting that imperfection could be beneficial. He left the warning unfinished. After Mark left, Tom kept watching the medical feeds. He saw humans recovering from injuries that would have permanently deactivated his own people. Broken bones, torn muscles, even damaged organs, their bodies fought to repair everything. He thought about his own species' perfectly regulated systems, their flawless replacement parts, their carefully controlled biological processes. They never got stronger. They never improved. They were exactly the same, generation after generation. Perfect, unchanging. Static. For the first time in his life, Tom wondered if maybe their definition of perfection had been too narrow. As he watched another human recovery scan, he felt something dangerous growing in his mind. Doubt. What if the ability to change, to break and rebuild, to learn from damage? What if that was its own kind of perfection? Tom had been watching the same human for 6 hours, and they were still moving. According to his readings, this human had already run over 40 kilometers, and their body showed no signs of shutting down. If anything, they seemed to be running faster. He checked his instruments again. This had to be wrong. His own species could achieve brief bursts of intense activity, but they needed recovery cycles after just minutes of exertion. These humans just kept going. "Computer, show me their energy consumption patterns," he commanded. The screen filled with graphs tracking the runner's metabolism. The numbers made no sense. The human body was burning through energy at an incredible rate, but instead of stopping to recover, it was adapting to work even harder. A message flashed on his screen. Mark wanted to meet him in the main observation room. Tom found his superior studying a wall of monitors showing humans engaged in various physical activities. "Your latest report is causing concern," Mark said without turning around. "The council believes you may be exaggerating human physical capabilities." Tom moved to stand beside him. "Watch this," he said, pointing to a screen showing humans in something called an ultramarathon. They run for days. Days. Not just one or two humans, hundreds of them. They sleep for short periods, then continue running. "Impossible," Mark said, but his skin showed uncertainty. No species can maintain physical activity for that long. The energy requirements alone. They don't just maintain it. Tom interrupted excitedly. They chase prey this way. Their ancestors would pursue animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. The humans call it persistence hunting. Mark's skin rippled with disbelief. They outrun other species, with their inefficient mobility systems. "That's just it," Tom said. "We thought their systems were inefficient because they waste so much energy. But that's their advantage. They dump heat through sweating. Their muscles tear and rebuild stronger. Their joints absorb shock. They're built to just keep going." He pulled up more data on the screens. "Look at their sleep cycles. Even their rest is inefficient. Instead of proper shutdown periods, they drift in and out of consciousness. Their brains stay partially active, processing information, repairing tissues, consolidating memories." "And this works better than our regulated rest cycles?" Mark asked. "Different," Tom said carefully, remembering how his previous enthusiasm had worried his superiors. "They sacrifice efficiency for adaptability. We can operate at peak performance for short periods. They can operate at reduced efficiency almost indefinitely." A new alert caught their attention. One of the observation drones was tracking the human lifting weights. Tom expanded the image, letting Mark watch as the human deliberately strained against heavy objects, pushing their muscles to failure. "See what happens to their tissue density over time," Tom said, pulling up comparative scans. "Every time they reach their limits, their bodies adapt. More muscle fibers, denser bones, improved nerve responses. They don't just recover, they get stronger." Mark's skin showed the pattern for deep concern. "This matches your findings about their regeneration abilities. But the energy cost." "They eat constantly," Tom confirmed. "Their digestive systems are just as strange as everything else. They can process an incredible variety of materials for energy. And look at this." He brought up data about human energy storage. "They keep emergency reserves in specialized fat tissue. They can go days without new energy input. Like their temperature regulation," Mark mused. "Inefficient but flexible." Tom felt encouraged by Mark's thoughtful tone. "There's more. Their endurance isn't just physical. Their bodies can go days without sleep, weeks without food, months without certain nutrients. Everything about them is designed to just keep going, no matter what." He paused, gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. "Senior researcher, I'm beginning to think we've been looking at this all wrong. We achieve perfection through control and efficiency. But the humans, they achieved something else, something that might be just as valuable." Mark was quiet for a long moment, watching the screens. "Be very careful with such thoughts, junior researcher," he said finally. "The Council is already concerned about your growing fascination with human biology. Some are suggesting you might be becoming unstable." But as Mark turned to leave, Tom noticed his superior's skin showing traces of the pattern for wonder. Maybe he wasn't the only one starting to question whether their perfect, unchanging biology was really as perfect as they had always believed. Tom stared at his screen in disbelief. He had been analyzing human eating habits when he noticed something that couldn't possibly be right. He ran the tests again, but the results were the same. These humans were deliberately consuming poisons and enjoying them. He was compiling an emergency report when Mark burst into the lab, his skin flashing urgent patterns. "Your monitoring systems must be malfunctioning," Mark said. "They're showing humans willingly ingesting toxic substances." "The systems are working perfectly," Tom replied, pulling up multiple data streams. "Look at this. They drink something called coffee that contains a nerve toxin. They season their food with capsaicin, a chemical that triggers pain receptors. They even consume ethanol for pleasure." Mark's skin rippled with horror. "That's impossible. These substances should kill them instantly." "Not only do they survive," Tom said, his voice rising with excitement, "they develop tolerance. The more toxins they consume, the more their bodies adapt to process them. Some humans even claim these substances make them feel better." He showed Mark a series of scans displaying human liver function. "Their filtration organ is incredibly sophisticated. Instead of shutting down when it encounters poison, it produces enzymes to break the toxins down. It can even repair itself if damaged. And they do this voluntarily." Mark's skin showed a mix of disgust and fascination. "They seek out these substances," Tom confirmed. "Look at this." He pulled up footage from something called a spicy food challenge. They watched as humans deliberately consumed plants containing increasingly powerful irritants, their faces showing signs of distress even as they continued eating. "But why?" Mark asked. "Why would they deliberately poison themselves?" Tom brought up more data. "It seems to be tied to their adaptability. These toxins trigger stress responses in their bodies, like their physical training. The stress makes them more resilient. Some of these substances even have beneficial effects when consumed in small amounts." A new alert caught their attention. Tom expanded the screen to show humans in something called a wine tasting. They were deliberately consuming ethanol in different forms, discussing subtle variations in the poison's effects. "Their relationship with toxins goes beyond simple tolerance," Tom explained. "They've developed entire cultures around consuming these substances. They use them in social bonding, religious ceremonies, and medical treatments. They've turned poisons into pleasures." Mark's skin showed the pattern for deep concern. "The Council won't like this. First their temperature regulation, then their regeneration abilities, then their endurance, and now this. They're breaking every rule of biological advancement we know." "That's just it," Tom said carefully. "Maybe our rules are too narrow. Look at this." He pulled up a comparison between human and alien liver function. "Our filtration organs are perfectly efficient at processing our standard nutrient intake. But introduce anything new. We die," Mark finished quietly. "Our perfect systems can't adapt to changes." Tom nodded. "Humans can eat almost anything. If something's poisonous, they either develop tolerance or their bodies learn to break it down. Their digestive systems are chaos compared to ours, but that chaos gives them incredible flexibility." He brought up more data streams. They consume plants, animals, fungi, sometimes all in the same meal. They can survive on almost any combination of nutrients. Some even deliberately restrict their diets in ways that should kill them, but their bodies adapt to extract what they need from whatever they eat. Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying the screens. You're suggesting their inefficient processing of nutrients is actually an advantage. Look at their spread across their planet, Tom said. They can live anywhere because they can eat anything. They don't just survive toxins, they use them. The substances that should kill them become medicines, stimulants, even sources of pleasure. A warning flashed on Tom's screen. The council was requesting an immediate report on his findings. Mark's skin showed the pattern for warning. Be careful how you present this, junior researcher. The council is already struggling with your previous reports about human biology, suggesting that their toxic tolerance is an advancement rather than a flaw. But what if it is? Tom asked quietly. What if everything we thought was wrong with their biology is actually what makes them remarkable? As Mark left the lab, Tom looked back at his screens. Somewhere on Earth, humans were eating foods that would kill his entire species, drinking poisons for enjoyment, and using toxic substances to heal themselves. Their bodies weren't just surviving these challenges, they were thriving on them. And for the first time, he wondered if perhaps his own species' pursuit of biological perfection had led them down the wrong path entirely. The alarms woke Tom from his rest cycle. Red warning lights pulsed through the research station as the computer announced that environmental controls were failing. The station's perfect, stable environment was falling apart. He rushed to the main control room, his skin already showing stress patterns from the temperature fluctuations. Other researchers moved through the corridors in panic, their bodies struggling to adjust to the changing conditions. Status report. Mark's voice cut through the chaos as he entered the control room. His normally perfect tone wavered slightly. Multiple system failures, one of the technicians reported, their skin flickering erratically. Primary and backup environmental regulators are offline. Temperature control is failing. Atmospheric mix is becoming unstable. Tom checked the readings. The station's temperature was swinging wildly, up 10 degrees, down 15, then up again. The atmospheric pressure was fluctuating. Even the gravity generators were becoming unreliable. We need to evacuate, Mark ordered. Our bodies can't handle these conditions. Begin emergency shutdown procedures. Wait, Tom interrupted, earning shocked looks from everyone in the room. Look at these readings. They're within human survival ranges. Mark's skin showed the pattern for both anger and fear. This is hardly the time for your obsession with human biology, junior researcher. No, you don't understand, Tom insisted, pulling up his research data. Humans live with these kinds of changes every day. The temperature swings we're experiencing. They call this weather. The pressure changes. They climb mountains for fun that have bigger pressure differences. That's fascinating, Mark said sharply. But we are not human. Our biology requires stability. Perfect homeostasis. Without it. He was cut off by the sound of several researchers collapsing. Their bodies, unable to handle the environmental changes, were shutting down non-essential systems to preserve core functions. It was their species' perfect survival response. And right now, it was their biggest weakness. Our perfect biology is killing us, Tom said quietly. We can only function in perfect conditions. But look at these readings. They're extreme for us. But humans would barely notice them. They might be uncomfortable, but they wouldn't shut down. More researchers were collapsing around them. Tom felt his own body struggling to maintain its functions as the temperature swung upward again. But instead of letting his systems shut down, he tried something dangerous, something inspired by his human research. He forced his body to stay active, to adapt, to fight against the changes instead of shutting down to wait for perfect conditions to return. It hurt. Everything in his biology screamed against this imperfect functioning. But he stayed conscious while others collapsed. What are you doing? Mark asked, noticing Tom's strange behavior. The senior researcher was struggling to maintain his own functions. I'm trying to be more like them, Tom said through the discomfort. Humans don't shut down when conditions aren't perfect. They adapt. They sweat. They shiver. They change their breathing. Their bodies are constantly fighting to stay alive. That's not how we're designed, Mark argued, but Tom could see the doubt in his skin patterns. Maybe that's our flaw, Tom said. We designed ourselves to be perfect, but only in perfect conditions. Humans are imperfect, but they can survive almost anything. Right now, which is better? The station's systems continued to deteriorate. More and more of their people were shutting down, their perfect biology unable to cope with imperfect conditions. But Tom stayed conscious, fighting against his own nature, trying to match even a fraction of human adaptability. Hours passed. The backup systems finally kicked in, slowly restoring the station's perfect environment. As their people began to recover, Tom could see something had changed. The researchers who had witnessed his imperfect but functional response to the crisis were showing skin patterns he'd never seen before, patterns that might have been the beginning of doubt in their own perfection. Mark approached him as the last of the environmental systems came back online. "The Council will want a report about this incident," he said quietly. "Yes," Tom agreed. "And I think it's time we told them the truth about human biology. It's not flawed or primitive or inefficient. It's something else entirely, something we might need to learn from." Mark's skin showed agreement. The first time any superior had supported Tom's view. Perhaps watching their perfect biology fail, while humans would have easily survived, had finally opened their eyes to a different kind of biological advancement, one based not on perfection, but on adaptation. Tom stood before the Research Council, his skin carefully regulated to show proper respect. The 7 council members sat in their perfect semicircle, their own skin patterns showing a mix of concern and disapproval. The chamber's environmental controls hummed softly, maintaining the perfect conditions they all required. Conditions that, just days ago, had proven to be their greatest weakness. "Junior researcher," the head counselor spoke, their tone precisely modulated. "You have submitted a most unusual final report on human biology. You claim that their biological imperfections are not flaws at all." "Correct, council leader," Tom replied, forcing himself to maintain steady skin patterns despite his nervousness. "After extensive research, including the recent station crisis, I have concluded that human biology represents a different path of advancement, one based on adaptation rather than perfection." He activated the chamber's display systems, showing the data he had gathered. Humans survive through constant change. Their temperature regulation allows them to function in environments that would shut our systems down. Their regenerative abilities let them recover from injuries that would require our parts to be replaced. The council members shifted uncomfortably as Tom continued. "Their endurance capabilities mean they can maintain activity long after our perfect efficiency would require us to rest. Even their ability to process toxins shows how their imperfect biology gives them incredible flexibility." "These are known facts," another council member interrupted, their skin showing impatience. "The question is whether these primitive features represent an actual advantage." Mark, standing quietly at the back of the chamber, stepped forward. "Council members, I witnessed firsthand how their primitive features would have saved us during the station crisis, while our perfect biology forced us to shut down." Junior researcher Tom attempted to mimic human adaptation patterns. He remained functional when most of us could not. The chamber filled with patterns of shock and concern. Tom quickly continued before they could interrupt. "The station crisis proved what my research had suggested. We designed our biology to be perfect, but only under perfect conditions. Humans evolved to survive imperfect conditions, which, in a universe full of chaos and change, might be the better adaptation." He brought up new data streams. "Look at how they spread across their planet. They live in frozen wastelands and burning deserts. They thrive at high altitudes and in deep valleys. They eat foods that would kill us and turn poisons into medicines. Their imperfect biology lets them adapt to almost anything." "Are you suggesting," the head counselor asked slowly, "that we should abandon our pursuit of biological perfection?" "No," Tom said carefully. "I'm suggesting we expand our definition of perfection. Our perfect stability is ideal for unchanging conditions. But humans show us there's another kind of perfection, the perfect ability to adapt to change." He showed them footage from Earth, humans running marathons, healing from injuries, surviving extreme conditions, eating varied diets. Everything we thought was wrong with their biology serves a purpose. Their inefficient temperature regulation lets them survive extreme environments. Their wasteful regeneration system lets them grow stronger from damage. Their chaotic endurance adaptations let them outlast any other species. Their imperfect digestive system lets them survive on almost anything. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Tom could see complex patterns flowing across their skin as they processed his words. Finally, the head counselor spoke. "Your report suggests a radical shift in our understanding of biological advancement. This will require significant discussion and study." However, they paused, their skin showing a pattern Tom had never seen on a council member before. Uncertainty. Recent events have demonstrated that perhaps our current understanding is incomplete. "What do you recommend?" another council member asked. Tom felt Mark's supportive presence behind him as he gave his answer. "I recommend we establish direct contact with humans, not to study them as primitive beings, but to learn from them as equals. Their biological adaptability complements our biological stability. Together, we might discover there's more than one path to advancement." The council chamber erupted in complex skin patterns as the members discussed his proposal. But Tom noticed something important. None of them showed the pattern for outright rejection. The station crisis had shaken their confidence in biological perfection. Perhaps they were finally ready to consider that there might be something right about human biology after all. As he waited for their decision, Tom thought about how humans would handle this moment of uncertainty. They wouldn't shut down or wait for perfect conditions. They would adapt, learn, and grow stronger from the challenge. Maybe it was time for his species to try doing the same.